for someone who hasn't really thought about this world of audio, could you like introduce it to a general audience? And I'll tell you why. Because in our first class, I vaguely knew what this entailed, but I think it took that first class to show me that audio is such a important part of media, and so I want to give that experience to the listener.
Coming from this side of the class, which is you're always looking at audio in a particular way, it's a little tricky for me to kind of explain what it really entails in the media landscape, what audio entails in the media landscape. But I'll say this much, that irrespective of the kind of media content that you're thinking about, unless and until it's like a silent movie, but even then it'll have some sort of effects. Audio is pretty much the backbone of any sort of content creation. And I'm oversimplifying it by calling it content. I think I won't be exaggerating if I say like I have a coffee mug which says like audio is life, because it's the one sense which you can't escape. I mean, you can choose not to touch something, you can choose not to taste something or see something, you can shut your eyes, you can turn those senses off, but audio is a sense which you can't turn off. And there is I guess some merit to the fact that even when a mother's carrying a child, like, audio is a sense which has to be turned on. Like, I'm sure it's like a industrial death metal concert inside a human body that the kid is getting to experience. But it's just something which is always on, always active. And in equal measure, it's unfortunate that you don't seem inundated by audio. Like, just because it's everywhere, you still don't feel like like the burden of audio around you. But at the same time, it's unfortunate that people don't notice enough of it. But I'm digressing. I'm riffing on this idea. But I just feel like if you were to introduce someone to the idea of audio, it's as critical and as vital as food. You've always been listening and you've always been, well, chowing on calories. So that's the way I like to think about it.
I think we hear it so much that our brain automatically tunes it out. And this is something that you said in class also. Like our brain automatically features what is not important, or at least what it's gotten used to. And so I feel like you have a heightened sensitivity to audio from my experience.
It's just a question of practice, really. Like I guess, like through the years, trained myself to be a little more aware of this sense as opposed to the others. And just like a sommelier could smell a wine and tell you, like what he or she thinks that it's made up of, like what are the sense, I guess, like which are getting triggered. Like I just trained myself to listen as closely as possible. Like, because I really think like opening up the sense of just being present and listening to shit, like, just grounds you and changes your perception of the present moment into something very real. Like for me, it's this tug of war between like the brain is always trying to reconstruct the past to make sense of who we are, and we're always trying to anticipate the future. you know but smack in the middle of it is this present moment which needs to be like perceived, and which needs to be which is life, really. And in that sense, like, you just have your senses to rely on, like, to make sense of what's happening. So for me, like, I've just spent time in practicing and trying to keep this oral effect like very like front and center. Yeah.
Was there a specific moment in your life where you realized your interest in this? Like, and do you remember that orally? Do you remember that memory orally?
And I do, like, I mean, just the short version of this answer would be it was 1991 and it was Beatles. I mean, it has to be connected to music in some way, at least for me. So it turns out, I remember that it was an afternoon, we were in Agartala. This is Tripura, back, God knows when, 1991, like, I can't even think back how many years ago there was that. Uh, like, my dad had this music hi-fi system deck thing that he had built, and there was Beatles ka Hard Day's Night just lying over the cassette, and I didn't realize it, but the amp was all the way up. Didn't realize it. So I remember, like, it was just set up and I hit play. I'm sure I'd heard music before that. I mean, I remember, like, my mom playing, like, MS Subbulakshmi, Suprabhatam and all in the morning and all that. But I remember that moment, man, like, I hit play and that first chord of Hard Day's Night hit. And, you see that, like, you see this in films where it's that vertigo Hitchcock wala shot that it's going piche and aage at the same time.
They call it a dolly zoom, I think.
Yeah, there you go. So it felt like that for me, man. Like, as if, like, I've just like the music has hit me. I'm still standing there, but like everything else is just shut off. I remember that moment, man. Like the first chord hit and the Beatles. Yeah, that for me was like, I don't know what is happening, but this is the closest to magic. So, and since then, it's just been about like I started listening to music actively after that. Yeah, just try to figure out like what is this magical thing that's happening. Like, like I can't reach out and grab it, but it's doing things like to me. It's changing my mood. It's changing my emotion. And I would like to imagine that I started being a little more aware around that time. That's a romantic idea. Probably not. But yeah, like 1991. That's the moment I remember it.
I think when you mentioned musician and so on, like we'll talk about Advaita.
Hmm.
I just wanted to know, like, as someone who works with audio, what's like, what would you be listening for specifically, or how would you be listening rather when you hear a piece of music as opposed to just a general listener who plays something on Spotify?
I am a general listener. Like
Are you?
I would really like to believe so. I don't think that there is anything special about my ears. I refuse to believe it. Like uh, I'll support this up with some arguments, I guess. Like I think the minute you get your eardrums get hit by some sound, right? Like you get hit by some sound. Now your brain is trying really hard to like notice it, filter it, whether it should react to it. If not, it suppresses it. Like even now, if I just stay quiet for a second, I can hear four different sounds, right? I can hear like a motor going off over there, or like some sort of a electrical hum, the lights over there. I can hear some high frequency coming out of it. What I'm saying is, it's there, like if you notice it. Now, in terms of music, it just has this magical ability to kind of zone in on your emotional center and change it, right? Now, I guess the broad category would be there are two kinds of listeners. One who would go out seeking for music, and one who would just listen to music and react to it. By seeking out music, I mean like you will go back and play something familiar again. Whatever it is that you like. Radiohead ho gaya, ya jo bhi. Like you play something that I feel like listening to this. And the other category, every once in a while, I think like everyone should indulge in it, is that I'll just play something, but I will tune in just for a second or two maybe, but really really be honest about what it's doing to me. You know, like literally the subtle things, like does it make me just shift around in my seat a little bit? Or if I'm standing up, like does any part of my body just want to tap along with it? Just find some center with which through which I feel connected to the music. Now it could be rhythm, it could be melody, anything. I think everybody does that. And now there are angles of like, I guess like peer pressure or like society over here that thing is famous. So you should get with it. You should listen to it. I honestly don't give a shit about that. I don't. Like virtuosity or popularity does nothing for me. Music has to hit some emotional core center thing. It has to hit something. It has to change something momentarily. And then, I guess what I said about like, we are constantly this habit of reconstructing a past to justify ourselves in the way we are right now. And that's all. Like, I remember the first time I heard the Beatles, and every time I put the Beatles on, like a part of my brain remembers that memory. And it's not the same impact at all. But yeah, that's it. So in that spirit, I'm saying I'm no different, but I am just investing a little more in the moment in which I'm hearing the music. I am just like, I can't do passive listening. I can't. If I'm like last year when I was driving to campus for sessions, like it's a 2-hour drive, but I don't listen to music. Like I will listen to a podcast or something else. I can't do passive listening, man. Most of the times. And yeah, that's it. Like when I listen, then stuff has to shut down. I have to really hear it. And if it is something which I've heard before, that's fine. I mean, it just like, but there's only one thing. Like I walk in and I'm like, Alexa, play Miles Davis. That's the only thing I want as a soundtrack of my life. Something mild should be happening, Piche, and that's it. I'm no different, man. Yeah, and anyone who says that they're an expert anyone who says they're an expert in listening, they are probably full of shit. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I can totally imagine you in an elevator or something and then like listening to the notes and thinking about why they put it in a particular way or what they could have done. But I mean, yeah, I think it boils down to intention, just like listening for a purpose and not just like in the background. Maybe I don't think you like the term background music, just from what I've gathered.
I don't have a problem with it because, in the spirit of what I'm paraphrasing, I guess, like this idea of John Cage, that there's always something happening. Famously, I mean, everybody knows about that thing, 432, 433, he had this music piece where people had assembled for a performance, and this pianist walks up on stage and opens the piano and just sits there, a minute later or something, just like turns a page, shuts the piano down and all that. So the idea being that every time that piece is performed, it's different because the audience is different, and the sounds that are happening around you are different and all that. So there is always something going on. Now, whether we choose to notice it, make sense of it, steal from it, or get inspired by it, whatever you want to call it, there's always something going on. I don't have any pretense of like this superiority, that I, like you said, like if you're in an elevator and some music is playing in the background and all that and you're hearing it, I have no problem. This interesting thing happened around the COVID years. Like I've been trying this for the longest time, like when I start my day, I guess like everyone has been Huberman to a particular level. So when I start my day, I really try and get sunlight immediately. So I will just, touch out of bed and like I'll walk outside and just like expose myself to some sunlight in, just for a bit. And I started doing this thing through the years that I would just like count the number of sounds I'm hearing. And in my mind, like just assign a fader to each of them and then just start turning it up or down, So like I can hear birds right now chirping. And wouldn't it be cool like if you can just like turn it up, and that turning it up just means paying attention to it. And turning it down would just be like not noticing it anymore, for example. So I started doing this thing where like for 5 minutes, I would like really try and quote unquote like meditate with my eyes open, listen to everything and just like assign a sound to that fader, acknowledge that sound, assign a fader to that sound, acknowledge that sound and just like turn it down, So 5 minutes later, when I'm trying to walk back into the house to make myself a cup of coffee, I'll be like, I would have experienced like close to silence for just about a second. And it's blissful, Because as soon as you walk in, like life smacks you in the face, But yeah, and I realized that during the COVID years, during the lockdown years, this has become really easy. I mean, there were so few sounds to contend with anyway, and then you start hearing the buzzing of life, and you kind of get tuned to it, so it's fine. It's fine. Every once in a while, I'm like a psychopath, man. I'll be sitting in a crowded place with like not looking at my phone or anything and just sitting there, and in my mind, I'm just giving faders to every sound and just turning it down, turning it down. So yeah, just like I find joy in that practice.
I think that's also something that you get out. At least that's what I got out after doing the course. I do listen with intention now, and I'm sure this happens to you. Like, do you say when you watch a movie, for example, and there's like a filler scene, but there's a very clever bit of sound design that happens there. Do you? I mean, I do this. I pause and I'm like, what did I just hear? And then I go back and I try to like deconstruct that element. I can imagine you doing that.
So I will do it on the rerun. I will never do it on the first watch. I think in a way that whatever piece of content you're watching, right? Like play ho gaya ya film ho gaya ya kuch bhi ho gaya. Like whenever you're watching that, there is somebody who spent a lot of time in curating that moment, Like an entire team of people from like say a director to like, okay, let's just take a piece of music or, like somebody really spent a lot of time in getting that precise moment right, And I know it because being from this side of the fence, like you overthink the transitions between verses to choruses so much. And then you realize that some people just like don't even get till the first chorus. Maybe the song sucks or whatever. But the point is that somebody really curated that moment. And for you, and that moment has meaning only when there is something preceding it and succeeding it, Like there is a simple idea that you can only make sense of what happened now a second later. So in that spirit, like stopping it right then and there is just like destroying the experience. So I will take the time out and I will go back and I will watch the thing again or listen to it again. But you get only one shot at the first impression, man. And if something magical happens in that first impression, you are not in control of it. You're not sitting there and saying, I'm not going to like this. Or you're not sitting there and saying, just because it's, I don't know, Christopher Nolan, like I have to like this. Then it still doesn't make sense to me. Like maybe I'm just stupid. But yeah, like I will not pause it. I'll definitely go back to it. In fact, like, every once in a while, like when my wife and I are screening something and you're watching something and even if it, like, yeah, it might not be the most important quote unquote scene. But maybe if she comes up with a, like a conversation starter, we have to get this done tomorrow or something, I'll pause it. And then I'll go back like 20 seconds, Like, yeah, I won't stop it, man. That's just disrespectful. Yeah.
No, I totally get it. I think, especially now knowing, even just having dipped my toe a little into sound design, like there's a lot of work that goes into not wanting you to stop, but being so immersed that, you know, you don't even realize that this is something that happens.
It's crazy amount of work, man.
Yeah, no, I think you had given this lovely analogy of a sound designer or like an audio engineer, to give a broader term of, I think you had mentioned it was one of the scenes in The Greatest Showman where the guy is under the stage.
No, it's the Prestige. Nolan's Prestige.
Prestige, yeah, right. Yeah, could you give that analogy for the listeners?
You know, I keep telling like anyone who will want to listen to me in a student capacity or in a mentor-mentee capacity, that our job is really like to be invisible. If people hear your work, then there's a problem. They should be listening to, let's just call it the product right now. They should not hear the processing, but like the song. So in Nolan's Prestige, like towards the end of the film, there is this dire bit where Hugh Jackman takes a bow under the stage. You know, he can't reveal himself on stage to take the bow in front of the audience. And that's it. Like, that's the audio guy. You're curating this entire thing, but nobody should notice you. Nobody should notice you. Some of us turn into, I don't know if you've seen Wag the Dog, this movie, Dustin Hoffman, De Niro. Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting movie where the short version of it is Dustin Hoffman really wants credit in the end for what he's pulled off. And the thing is, he's not allowed to get it. He's not allowed to take it. Yeah, I mean, spoiler alert or whatever, but De Niro has him like knocked off in the film. But yeah, that's it. Like you can't. You have to be invisible. People have to hear the effect of your work, not your work. Nobody gets paid for that, man, and nobody's interested in that. Because the minute they hear your work, no, that means they just lost attention. They just lost it, and now they're listening to your work and thinking about how they could have done it better. You know, or because if it's the audio guy, that this song is not good enough. That's another rabbit hole which we should not get into. Yeah.
No, I mean, I did want to touch on that. I mean, I know there'll be added pressure for the sound design of this podcast because you taught me how to do it. But I do think that that's something that I didn't know before I started this. How much work actually goes into even like I'm going to do it for effect here, but all those little mouth sounds that need to be cleaned up, or even just clearing up the background noise, bringing up. I mean, okay, these are technical terms, but massaging the voice so that it sounds better, because the microphone, this is something that you taught us, the microphone doesn't pick out what we hear in person. And so I want to talk about that. But since you mentioned sound, you help with sound design, right? And so I actually wanted, so my earlier idea was that I'll play a bit of sound design here and then we could analyze it. But I think there are some copyright issues and like so on and so forth. So we're not going to do that. But I'm going to put you in a hypothetical scenario. Say someone comes to you and asks you for like designing a commercial or a movie. What are the like checklists that go through in your head? Like, what are you trying to understand in what they are looking for?
So unless until the audio guy, I mean, the sound designer is given a free rein, you know, that you can unleash your imagination and figure this out. There are, I guess, like tiers of complexity with which you could approach this. I guess the simplest would be that whatever you see on screen has to be populated with a sound. There is no such thing as silent in the real world. It just does not exist. Right? So even if it was just this being shot and now you're designing this, like you should go the extra mile to record, say, room tone and maybe just the creaky sounds of the chair, for example, or just like the rustling of clothes, something. But I'm saying that that's the lowest tier. Now, you could take this a step further and you could say that, like, for example, those nature documentaries, no? Give me a second. I'm trying to fight off this cough. For example, those nature documentaries. Nature doesn't really sound like that, man. It does not. Like, you know, that thing is amped up and hyped up, right? So you could think like a geek and say that I have these 4 areas of focus with which I can design. I could approach it from an angle of pitch. So, for example, you see, say, like a monitor lizard on screen, right? And it's walking towards you, right? And
I love the choice of animal, I must say, but continue.
Yeah, so you see a monitor lizard, and now you could slow motion this out and have like a really low pitched giant taiko kind of drum, like giving like big steps, right? And suddenly the camera pulls out and you see this monitor lizard walking towards a dinosaur, right? I'm saying that now you could zoom out and make it like the really high pitched sound could like really low pitched sound could suddenly become like high pitched and whimper up and all that. So rather, I mean, I guess what I'm trying to get at is it comes from a tier of complexity. Like how simple and how unnoticeable do you want the sound to be? See, because if the design is not right, no, if the sound design is not right, then the visual sticks out. Like it becomes to me as if like there is like a narrative mismatch between what's happening on screen and what you should be hearing. Now, in the context of say like an animation film, like say something like say Wall-E, for example, I mean then there are no boundaries, right? It's you are talking about like end of the world type thing where robots are cleaning out the earth while humans have left. Now you can go about it and do whatever you want to do. But I guess just those going back to those 4 tiers, you could approach it from pitch. You could approach it from what I guess call what I call the shape of the sound, like how transienty or how slow evolving it is, right? Of how how the envelope and the frequency, the pitch match together to give it like a timbral sense. I mean, fire alarms
Yeah,
of happening.
there's a fire alarm here in the building. No, but no, I get what you're saying. I think there's something so interesting in the example you just gave of the monitor lizard. The having that change in sound and like meshed in with the change in video angles. This is the scenario that we're picturing in our heads. I think that immediately tells the story, right? Like you're first looking at this lizard as this big lordly creature, but then when you zoom out and compare it to a dinosaur, it's like this very tiny animal. And I think that really shows the power of sound design in that one example there. Even with Foleying and so on. Like Foley, for the listeners, Foleying is basically hello. Foley is basically artificially scoring the sound for actions in this. I think you can do a better job explaining.
Yeah, it comes from this dude, I think Jack or John Foley, who set parameters, the technical parameters within which a Foley stage is constructed. And effectively, there are these Foley performers, like these sound actors, who are filling up the visuals that they see on the screen by like literally creating the design, the action of the design, and that is recorded. Then, I mean, that's a very streetwise definition of it. But the idea being that there has to be a balance of what the viewer expects and how much you want to shock them with. So for example, if you think of Dune, those grasshopper, like I forgot what they were called, man, and
But those grasshopper helicopter.
yeah, grasshopper helicopter. I forgot what it was called, but like that, it can't be a helicopter. At the same time, it can't be like not like a helicopter. So like there is some middle ground. There is this balance of what the listener is expecting, what the audience is expecting, and how much you can shock them with. Every once in a while I like doing this. Like I'll leave the camera, like the phone camera on, and just like I like to cook a lot, so I will just leave the camera on and I'll shoot myself like cooking. But then every once in a while I'll bring it in and into like Logic, and I will just design the sound, like just for fun. Like it's almost like it sounds like कि वेला इंसान है काम नहीं है, like doesn't have enough work. But just to keep this thing going, that I'm going to take something which is expected and believable at the same time, which is unexpected and surprising. Yeah, like just dissolve the boundaries that you will set as your practice parameters. So in that spirit, I guess like the short answer to your question would be कि it is very project and personality driven. It is very project and personality driven.
Since you mentioned Dune, like I think with Dune, now I'm talking about like designing the score, the background music, not background music, the music
Sure.
for the film. I think with Dune it perhaps was more straightforward in that it's a Middle Eastern kind of inspired story or landscape. So that's why they took those elements, right, in terms of the instruments. Am I getting that right?
I mean, your guess is as good as mine. I mean, really, you should have Hans on your podcast, and maybe he will answer this best for you.
Episode number 150 will be Hans.
But yeah, I mean, I guess if you would imagine that, set yourself up within a set of parameters, and you will land towards the point of some sort of believable answer, whether it's the choice of instruments or the choice of technique or the choice of creative approach. For example, Dunkirk. I mean, Dunkirk. It's constant tension building. It's constant. It just does. It's relentless, man. It just keeps hammering away, and it is so loud. It is so loud. But if you listen to Dunkirk's score, like it just constantly feels like a shepherd's stone.
Yeah, Shepherd's Stone. That's
Yeah,
what
it
I'm
just
looking for. Yeah.
feels like that. Like, so, I mean, you are, for the lack of a better word, like stealing or getting inspired from this thing and now translating it into a musical piece. In that way, Hans Zimmer is king, man. And everybody, actually, you don't have to look at like the top tier people. Anybody who sees something and chooses a soundtrack, and this is your regular Spotify listener also, and the one that you call regular Spotify listener. Like if you're just having a chill time with a few friends and somebody decides that let's put this music on, they are doing exactly the same thing. They are curating the sonic experience that you want to have at that present moment. Whether it is lived or whether it is recorded and then seen back again and lived again. But yeah, that's it. Like you are just trying to curate the right score. Sometimes it's music, sometimes it's silence, sometimes it's sound effects, whatever. But picking that out. And in that spirit, I don't think you can subtract the personality of the designer. Like if you come to my house, chill करने के लिए jazz बजेगा और कुछ नहीं बजने वाला. There is only jazz. There is nothing else. And yeah, maybe a little bit of some classical music, but like there's only jazz. And it's not because of like some elitist preference, but that's it. Like that's the soundtrack that you're picking out. You know?
Okay, one of the things that I would love to do, at least have the skill of, is being able to just compose music on the spot. And okay, and for this example, let's put us in the hypothetical shoes of Hans Zimmer. If we are given this brief that we have a movie based in space and it's this big space adventure, I'm referring to Interstellar. What do you think went through his mind in terms of choosing the piano? And then how did he go about choosing the specific notes? Okay, I know I'm really dumbing down the art of like composing a song, but how do you really translate those ideas into notes on a piano, or in your case, a guitar or something?
Again, like episode 150, when you have Hans on, like he'll probably be best suited to answer this. But in the spirit of Interstellar, like I don't think Christopher Nolan, from what I've read, I don't think Nolan told him that it's set in space. I think he gave him the brief that it's a love story between a father and a daughter.
Yeah,
And
yes. I'm like, I recorded a video on this.
And the choice of instrumentation and all, and like eventually wherever Hans lands, he lands. But
no, I mean, we can leave Hans Zimmer even for you.
For example, there is a certain musical taste and preference that I have. Like I really like dark sounding musical intervals played in an interesting rhythm and served with like a lot of stacking up of sounds, but it appears minimal. It's almost like saying that there is a certain proclivity for a certain kind of musical intervallic information.
Whoa.
Let me simplify it. So for example, I mean, there are only 7 notes, right? And when you say music, you and I both agree that we are talking about the Western classical music tradition. They have decided that these are the intervals. This is the distance between 2 notes. And if you take one note and you skip one note and you play the third note, you will get some sort of a nice dyad. Skip another note and add another note and you will get a triad. And this makes a chord. And these chords go together. If you're in this key, if you change the key, then chords will change, but the relationship between the notes will remain the same. So a major chord will always remain a major chord. Now, with that basic amount of information, there are just like 4 principal groups of triads. What I mean to say is, there are 12 notes, right? If everybody's seen a piano, there are 7 white keys and 5 black keys. There are 12 notes, and principally you can get like intervallic combinations, a lot of intervallic combinations, but more or less like they're families of sounds. So as somebody who, I am self-taught in music, but like as somebody who goes through the process of training and all that, they will familiarize themselves with the mechanics of the instrument that they're learning. First of all, you have to learn how to play these sounds, these intervals on your particular instrument. In the Western music tradition, if it's the guitar, you'll learn chords, shapes. If it's the piano, you will learn whatever, like same chords. Now, as you learn this, right? As you learn this, you will develop a sensibility towards sounds you like and sounds you don't. And this happens when you learn pieces. So, for example, if you sit and you transcribe Bach, for example, or if you do, I don't know, Miles or whatever, like when you transcribe, no, there is a certain language that you begin to appreciate. That it sounds nice when these set of notes go to these set of notes, and then they go to these set of notes. And then when you step back and you see that there is this one overarching theme, drama. That's it. I'm sure you've heard, everybody will resonate with this, that we like to tell stories, even a simple incident of like, "Arey, pata hai kya hua subah?" Like it begins with this enthusiasm of like storytelling. And musical narrative, the heart of it is rooted in this idea of storytelling. There is drama. And that drama can now be broken up into two parts. You have to do something to build up the tension, and now you have to do something to release that tension. And keep this going cyclically as many times as you will get some sort of form now. Right? That is it. Now, for certain people, certain kinds of sounds evoke a feeling of tense, quite tense, very tense, unbearable, and this resolution is okay. This one sounds divine. This one sounds godly. This is unbelievable. And when you now start arranging these blocks within the parameters of a melody, take something as simple as happy birthday to you, right? Every culture has heard it. I'm not going to sing. But if you play the first line back in your head, happy birthday to you, it's straight. Happy birthday, right? The third line is setting up if you now imagine you finish the song at the third line, like happy birthday, dear Ishan.
Yeah, I feel little tense.
That is tension, man. You cannot leave it there. Everybody that is listening to it with a base level understanding of drama will be like, resolve this shit.
Yeah.
And the last line resolves it. Whether it's happy birthday to you, whether it's the most complicated piece of music that you can play out in your head right now, everything is tension release. That's it. There is nothing else. I mean, we do it in spoken word, right? If I was to continue talking like this nonstop, and like it will just become boring after a while because there are no rests, there are no intonation moves, there's nothing. But if you slow down, now I'm not saying I'm Morgan Freeman, but there is a certain kind of pause which you can introduce in your spoken word, which leans onto the next one, That's it. Like we are constantly trying to do it all the time. Create moments of drama, create moments of tension, and then resolve them. If the resolve and if the release in this tension is accepted by a wider demographic, you have a hit on your hands. And then it becomes like a new form. Then it becomes popular. It becomes flavor of the month, of the year, of the decade. It becomes this thing which everybody will do, right? And then the slightest amount of deviation and change from that will completely turn the industry the other way. Like abhi, I don't know, hip-hop ka zamana hai, for example. Rap is in. Sure, it's a great art form. Just yesterday, even though I said I don't listen to music in the car, but like, the new Kendrick album kicks ass, man. Like, full power, like turn it up and like play it. But yeah, like eventually it will go. It has to. Something else will happen. And then something else will happen. But yay, so go. I mean, it's a long digression to answer that simple question, that whenever a so-called informed and quote-unquote educated music producer is trying to do something, right, the choice of notes and all of it stems from this basic idea of what feels like home. And now in how many ways can I step away from this home, create some sort of tension, and then get a roadmap to come back to this, And the more you study the forms of music, the more you start seeing the formulas. And the more you hear the stuff that you're like, this formula seems invisible in it, So, yeah, I don't know if it answers the question, but like, that's the way I would like to think about it.
I think it does. I think even, this might be a bit of a stretch, but it might not be. I think just this idea of tension release can be seen in other forms of media, creativity. I don't know, you can choose the word, but like in writing, I'm sure there's, like if you're writing a novel, for example, I'm sure there is some way in which you can sort of overlay this formula of tension and release to keep people engaged. Like you want them on the edge of their seat, but you also want them to relax and lay back as they consume a piece of
Absolutely. I mean, I'm no expert on writing or whatever, but like, sometimes there is this idea that you feed the reader sentences of different length, just that like adds a certain rhythm. And I guess it was great writing, no? For example, again in the spirit of like Hugh Jackman taking about the end of Prestige, it's almost invisible, man. I think Orwell, it's his line that good prose is like, imagine you're in a room and like there's a window, and good prose is like looking through the window outside. It's not looking at the window. I'm
Yeah.
paraphrasing over here, but it's kind of like that. Like same thing. The idea of good work done should really be invisible. It has to be irrespective of the form, irrespective of the creative art form that you're trying to talk about. Like it should just be you're seeped in it. Yeah,
You shouldn't notice the art form itself, but what the artist in whatever medium you're talking about wanted you to feel. Like that is the gold standard to
yeah.
get
See,
there.
this goes back to what we started our conversation with. Like my idea is that I am more interested in what any piece of music, any sound is doing to me. Like because I am not special or nobody is special, man. Like if I'm reacting a particular way, there has to be at least one more person in this world who will react the same way. And come on, like that number has to be much bigger, right? And that's it. Set number of people are going to now react to it in a certain way. Like if there was now a loud bang in the corridor, all of us are wired to like turn back and like hear that sound. I'm just, it's an extreme example to give, but I'm just saying ki you must really be in tune with or try to be in tune with ki what did that do to me? How did I react? And then just like macro view of ki, okay, I need to tune this to feel like that. This sound already has it. Sometimes it happens, like somebody plays like a chord and you're like, this doesn't do it. But you change one note, you change the balance of how this Jenga tower stands. And suddenly you're like, huh, this looks like it's going to break, but it's still pretty solid. Like it's done. Like that's a good move then. Yeah. I mean, we could riff on this endlessly, but the idea being that बहुत ज़रूरी है to figure out like how you are vibing with it. Otherwise, it just becomes, what's the point otherwise?
This when you were describing your own music taste, you had used the word dark.
Mm.
And I always find it so interesting about how we could use adjectives that we use in our daily life to describe music or even certain types of sound. So I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll do a bit of a rapid fire now. I'll just give you five or so music like people who produce music or bands that produce music, and you tell me an adjective that comes to your mind.
Sure.
Okay.
I am not responsible if I say something negative. I'm just saying it. So
Yeah. No. This is just. I mean, yeah, of course. All right. Let's see. Okay. Let's start with Hans Zimmer.
man, that guy's he's like water. It really depends on where you're putting the water. Like it could be a glass, a cup, and all that. He just takes the shape of yeah.
Actually, that's so good. That is so nice.
He's that. Jesus, I've not even heard this person.
He's this Japanese composer. I mean, I think he scores a lot of anime, but he has a very it's intense. At least that's the word I would use. Okay, I think you'll find it interesting.
I will check him out. Yeah.
Let's see. Kendrick Lamar, since we were talking about it.
Yeah, it's electric. It's electric. There is an overdose of attitude. It's kind of like the first time hearing Beatles and the first time hearing To Pimp a Butterfly. I was not ready for it. I swear, man, I was not ready for it. And I've heard, what does this mean that I've heard a lot of music? But I've heard a lot of music. This doesn't sound right after the composer you named. And I'm like, I've not heard this guy. But I remember the first electric, man. It's electric. Yeah. So much personality. Yeah.
Have you heard of Howard Shore? Like he scored the Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
What would you say to him?
Yeah. It's at the same time, you could stare at one thing. Have you seen Mark Rothko's paintings? I know somebody will disagree, like, ki Mark Rothko and Howard Shore, but Mark Rothko's work and Howard Shore's music like sounds like it's dense, it's layered, but you could just pick to look at the whole thing and it seems like, it just seems like everything belongs together. Yeah. The rapid fire thing of answering in one word is not working out.
No, that's okay. I mean, I do want to pause it here since I mean, Howard Shore just came to my mind, but I did want to talk about him and his work, especially with the Lord of the Rings, because I think it really speaks to what it takes to build, to at least create an iconic tune. Like now I can hear the tune of The Shire, and I'm taken to that movie. I'm taken to that story. Even, I mean, for that matter, even Hans Zimmer. If I hear those five notes of, I could tell you the notes: A, E, B, E, like the whole Interstellar bass tune. Like I know what it is. Like, what do you think makes a piece of music iconic?
And I don't know. I wish I knew, because then I would replicate it. And, and instead of being in, I don't know, Malviya Nagar, I would be in Malibu. But I don't know, man. I really don't know, because it's so unpredictable, no? It's like $1 trillion industry with like no formula behind it. But I would say one thing, like when at the heart of it, no, there is this idea of simplicity. See, you are thinking of the score of Lord of the Rings, right? In all its glory and all, it's like it's almost like it is so big, that you feel like you can't get close enough to it. Like what I'm trying to imagine the scene, like it's just massive, man. Like you feel minuscule in front of it. Like that score is overpowering, you know. But I think at the heart of it is a hummable melody. Like it's a
Mm,
hummable melody. Like the simplest combination of notes. How you dress it does not matter. Because I'm sure there are goth metal bands that could play like Game of Thrones ka theme. Every you like a hummable melody at the heart of it. Because uske baad everything is like just stylized. I remember this. As Advaita, we were lucky enough to get our music across to this gentleman, Safta Jaffrey. He used to manage, he passed away, I think, post COVID. But he's managed iconic bands like Muse and all. And we managed to get some of our demos of what became our second album. And he heard them, and critiques apart, but he said this one thing which really has stuck with me. He said that you should be able to take one instrument and sing this song. Forget about layers and textures and how dense you want the music to feel in you. Whatever. Like you should be able to sing the song with a piano or a guitar or just one instrument. That idea of this hummable melody, like the most stripped down version of it. Because, excuse me, because somebody could take a ukulele or a ektara and play Game of Thrones ki theme on it. And your
yeah.
brain will orchestrate the rest. Like it'll imagine like whatever, like the giant orchestra playing it or whatever. Like, but that ornamentation is additional. At the heart of it is the simplest melody, simplest set of notes. For me, I know it's not a great score, but for me, the gold standard is Kubrick's. In my mind, Kubrick's Eyes Wide Shut.
No, I haven't heard of that.
That's his last film, and the main theme is just two notes. Two notes, the shortest interval apart, and it's just like this repetitive rhythmic form. Yeah, it's mental, man. That like it's. I remember the first time I saw it, like it's just stuck immediately. Anything that David Lynch, he passed away recently. Anything that David Lynch did, like the score in his films, smallest version, simplest hummable melody. Yeah. At the same time, I mean, if your foundational level of what defines simple is slightly elevated and slightly complex, then sure, maybe it might be too simple. But yeah, but my test, for example, like when I'm making something, whether it's a jingle or whatever, like kisi cheez ke liye bhi na, like I will always play it for my kids. If they now my son is a different story altogether, but like even my daughter, who's not shown as of now like any, she goes for some music classes and all that, but she's not shown an immediate like proclivity to sing and all. But if she starts humming it, then like it's done. Like if you've attracted the attention of a 4-year-old kid, how
Mm.
tough can a 40-year-old be? But
Yeah, I know. I
yeah,
love that.
simplest version of a melody.
I love that. There's so much to dive in there itself. I mean, we'll get back to the rapid fire. I have two, three more, but just having it be a hummable melody, such a simple, it's so hard to achieve thing, right? And I think what you said about your kids is also interesting. I mean, I know your son is all. I mean, obviously now he's a famous singer almost. I
Yeah,
I,
he's
I like
above
the
my pay
singer.
grade, man. Yeah, his musical knowledge. Yeah.
No, but I mean, even I guess kids. I don't know if you know this, but the Percy Jackson series. Maybe your kids are reading. I don't know if they're at that age.
Yeah, Ishan is.
It's one of my favorite series. And you know what? Rick Riordan, he was a teacher, the author. He was a teacher, and he got his feedback for the novels from his students, because kids don't hold back in terms of
Yeah,
and
yeah.
they just give it to you. And so, and some of the most iconic things in that book, like which now seems so obvious now that you've read the story, and in hindsight, those are things that came from his students. You know, on Howard Shore, since we were talking about, I had another question. So I don't know if you know, but the Lord of the Rings have, like, they have a new series, new, relatively new, like you could say 2 years.
I
And I
know.
mean, there are mixed opinions on how it's done, but the composer Bear McCreary, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. But so he had to, he was like, I mean, as the composer of like an extension of this same story, had to adopt the same musical language, but then create it in a new way. And so, like, if we were put in those shoes, like if the job were assigned to us, both of you, I mean, me being your assistant, how would we really think about it? Because we have a certain template of what Howard Shore had created, which became iconic from Lord of the Rings. But we had to create a new score, but with those elements.
Hmm.
It sounds like a very hard thing to square.
I guess, ye Hindustani classical music has this aspect of it. I'll try and make sense of this. Idea is that there is a bandish. There's a theme, a central theme. So this theme is home ground. Now, there are a set of parameters. You call it a rag. Within a set of time-based parameters, call it the lay, the rhythm, right? And now, within that, improvise, develop the motif. But at the same time, the listener should never forget that they are listening to this bandish. Like, the improvisation cannot be just random. It has to have meaning, and it has to be grounded in the central theme. So riffing from that idea does not matter. So for example, a lot of times I've done a few projects where you have to interpret the national anthem, for example. Now it's a set tune, right? And if it's being performed, there is a time criteria to it. It has to get done in so much time. I think 52 seconds, if I'm not mistaken. But you could take that idea and you could build just from that theme. Now you could steal from the rhythmic motif, you could steal from the melodic motif, and I'm using the word steal affectionately over here. But you could borrow from there. You could get inspired from there. I remember a few years ago, I did this documentary series. It featured on the Times Network, 10 episodes, 60 minutes each, 600 minutes of music. I made 600 minutes of music. Yeah, and arrogantly enough, I did it alone. I didn't have an assistant at all for it. But before we started work on the project, I came up with 2-3 thematic ideas, right? And I played it for the director of the show. And I said, ki these 5 notes arranged for, and the idea was just like 45 seconds long. This is the core of, I feel like what I was trying to go after was like, if I just loop this for 1 hour, is it going to make sense? Like, and by looping it, I mean like not like exact copies, but like say play the entire tune out, but like double the duration, or take 3 notes, speed them up, and vagara vagara. But basically, use the same motif and develop from there. So I did this whole 600-minute music project, 10, and the documentary series started from 1950 when India became a republic and finished 2014 when the current government like came to power for the first time and all. And I milked it, man, for 10 episodes. It just sounds like an easy way out, but then every time the episode would start, I would take the theme and use it. Like, you could tell it's coming from there. You could tell, either change the harmony or change the rhythmic pattern, change the instrumentation, something or the other. So this whole Lord of the Rings situation, it's actually easy if you think about it. And I'm not trying to sound like arrogant, like I know my shit and all, but easy because you already know what it should always feel like. Like, it's a simple binary situation over here. Does it feel similar? By similar, I mean inspired or borrowed from, or in this vein, like, does it feel like it's coming from the same universe? If it does, you're on the right path. Now all that matters is the ornamentation, the instrumentation, and the breaks. And over there, clever musical tricks could be used, like, again, going back to the drama idea, that if we can take this, identify the spots of, I'm in the universe, now I just need to create tension, I need to release tension, that's it. The problem over here is there's a bigger problem, that it's not in the hands of the creator. It's in the hands of the person who's expecting the music from you. It's
They
the
get the
direct,
final say.
yeah, it's the director who will look at that piece of music and say like, I mean, you are lucky if you vibe. I got like, again, speaking about that 600 minutes of music made for the documentary series, it was an unreal experience because nothing was rejected. Everything worked. You know, it's a very rare thing. It's a very rare thing. I mean, 2 scenes were like altered because of edit situations and all that in the 10 episodes. But yeah, like eventually it rests with the director only then. Because if it doesn't match what they are imagining, then you're done for. Like you got to keep reworking it. But yeah, just to answer that question, I guess like the short version of it, sorry, I keep digressing. But I guess the short version of it would be like, it has to belong in the same universe. It has to feel like it comes from here. And now it's just you answering that question that where does it want to go? You know?
Yeah, I think maybe you could see it as the right constraints. Like you're given almost like a few steps ahead. Like you're given a bit of a head start.
Man, without constraints, like this is a pretty harsh stance to take, but I'm paraphrasing from what Frank Zappa said. Frank Zappa said that, that without frames, without the boundaries, it's just shit on the wall. You need to enclose it. Constraints are not stifling. Constraints are liberating. Because your boundaries have already given me the outer edges of what is meaningful over here. That's it. If you come to me and you say that I want North Indian Hindustani classical music and I give you Mridangam and Veena, you see where I'm going on this. Like, that's a very extreme example, but you'll be like, boss, maine bola tha, I told you what I wanted. Like, populate this frame. That's all you have to do. Now, in that, I'm obviously, like, I'm not saying that it becomes easy, but I'm saying at least you know the outer edges. It's like when you start solving for jigsaw puzzles, you have to find the corner piece. You have to build your way inwards. You can't start from like, this piece looks like here and now let me find the outer edges. Doesn't work like that, man. It will be never ending. It'll never get done. It's the constraints are liberating, man. And it comes from this, I don't know. And every rejection, I know it sounds weird, but every rejection is actually a good thing. I mean, eventually it becomes like tiring, of course. I'm not saying that it should be endlessly rejected, but every rejection becomes a good thing because in the spirit of like, I know one more thing that doesn't work. Within the boundaries of this, if I've got only like so many things to explore, every time you reject an idea, you have to embrace the other one. There is no option. So every constraint actually liberates you. It's frustrating. It's incredibly frustrating. I'm not denying that. But yeah, man, I would rather have that. In fact, like whenever I start work on a project, even if you're totally going in without any, I mean, you're creating from ground zero, right? Like you have no idea what is expected. But I will always ask a director or whoever is the captain of the ship, what are you hearing in your head? Just tell me your point of inspiration, starting point, Kuch to reference hoga. And just tell me if you're seeing blue so that I don't start with yellow. That's it. That's all I want to know. That's it. If I start with yellow and you say, yeah, I'm really seeing blue, I will do whatever I have to do to the yellow to get it closer to blue.
Adding green. I believe that's how it works, right? Oh no, I'm not sure.
Yeah, neither am I.
No. It's blue and yellow which makes green. Sorry.
Oh, there you go. But I mean, all I'm saying is the constraints are liberating in that spirit. And knowing that, you have to do a lot of the things. I mean, yeah, get it. Then it comes down to skill of how equipped you are with the like production chops, But yeah.
I totally see that. Yeah. Oh, so I had three more people that I wanted to ask you.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll take your like what word you'd associate. Led Zeppelin.
That's the gold standard, man. That's the greatest band ever. That's the greatest band ever. And I know I started with talking about the Beatles and all that, but Led Zeppelin for me, it's just like it is perfection. It is perfection. Like one half of me as a bass player just wants to be John Paul Jones. And I'm always on the lookout for like who is doing Bonham-y shit. Yeah, Led Zeppelin is just gold standard of a band, what a band needs to be. Yeah, just I don't have a word for it, but it's just like Yeah, I'm getting goosebumps talking about Led Zeppelin. Yeah, but it's just, yeah, that's my gold standard band.
And the last one, Advaita.
Yeah, that's only, see, my instant reaction is nervousness. Yeah, it's just, I mean, Adv yeah, Advaita is like,
Wait, one second. I think before, for the people who are listening who don't have context, Sir is the bass guitarist in one of India's leading fusion bands called Advaita.
well, yeah, leading fusion bands, thank you for that.
One of the first, right? That's what you remember you telling me.
I mean, I would like to believe that there is a certain kind of fusion, pop fusion songwriting that Advaita managed to do, which before us, I'm sure there are people who have done it, but yeah, to my ears, it sounded like the best version. Usse pehle wala, yeah, it's BC and AD. So that's my ego talking, I guess, trying to make myself feel more relevant in my midlife. But yeah, Advaita for me, it's just it. I'm stumped, man. You know, imagine a seesaw, right? But it's a you've played that game Monument Valley.
No, I've not heard of it.
You should really try check that game out. But imagine like a seesaw, but it's got like a sideways dimension to it also. So it's not just this, yeah, but it's like it needs balance on every coordinate. You know, it just needs balance on every coordinate and like the right precise amount. At least in our minds, like Advaita is that. Like when I said our, like in the band's mind, like there is this I would say overthinking, but not in a fatiguing way. Yeah? I would say overthinking.
No, I think that's a very apt thing
Yeah.
in just what you have, in what really goes on in just writing a song, right? You listen to it and you're like, okay, I think the bass of the bass guitar needs to be amped up a little, or I mean, I'm simplifying it, I know,
No,
but
you're not. You know the okay. Let me try and riff on this. So the idea is that change is a constant. Everybody agrees, right? So now Advaita the band is 20 years old, and in 20 years, the band as an identity develops and evolves a certain way. It is a part of the soundtrack of a lot of people's lives. There is a past that is being reconstructed by an audience, right? It's also part of us. Like we wrote those songs, so we are involved with making sure that the songs remain alive. The thing is, the members in the band, right? All of them are also growing and evolving. Now they evolve. I mean, 20 years, man. You know, it's a lot to expect for six people to evolve in the same direction at the same time and all of that. You know, the tussle between getting your personality into the band while retaining this perception of what the band needs to be, while just sneaking in a little bit of evolution. That let's go in that direction a little bit, you know. That's the story, really. So you could become mildly successful and then try to hold on to that image for the rest of your career. And that's a very good place to be in. There is no problem with that, you know. It's a good enough runway if you can monetize and capitalize on it and all that. That's great, right? There is also this idea that you could become mildly successful and then you could use that platform to try and experiment a little more boldly. And in our minds, we are constantly stuck between in those two spaces, you know. Like the band has released 2 albums and we've got songs ready for at least another 10-song album. You know, but then these songs were written as late as like almost like one of the songs is like 11 years old, you know. We just haven't released it. We've played it every once in a while. It keeps changing. We keep writing new harmonies to it and new sections and so on and so forth. Every time you play it, it's a little different. It almost feels like the song doesn't belong to us. And that's the main criteria it has to pass. Like the song has to feel as if it belongs to us before we can relinquish the control and on that and like release it for people. So Advaita to me sounds like just like that. Like it's constantly trying to find the balance, but that like that entropy is a little mental right now. It like driving to Sonipat, like you realize like as you enter Haryana, no, like the speed breakers change.
I have noticed this, yeah.
You know, the speed breakers change, and it's almost as if like people take like people construct speed breakers outside their houses to just stop everything from happening around it. A lot of the time, I mean, it's a crazy example to give, but you know, a lot of the time, like Advaita gets in its own way some at times. Like we have this image of what it's almost like a speed breaker for your own way forward. we start thinking that the song is so important that we need to come up with better versions of it, you know? So, and at some point in time, it will be ready. And this is just me trying to give an excuse of why we haven't released an album in the last 12 years. But yeah, it's just, for me, Advaita just seems like that very precarious balance, Ki, yeah, it changes a little bit of humidity and life form dies. So it's one of those.
Could you like take me into what goes into creating a song? And I'll give you a specific song, Mo Funk, which is I
Mhm.
think my favorite, and also I think it's the crowd favorite on your Spotify. It's like one of the top five. And so like what goes on, because these are like several different people working together to create this one joint piece of art. And so how does that work?
I mean, I could give you the story behind the song. So Abhishek, our guitar player, he kind of had the Mofunk is kind of named after a tabla player who quit a few years ago, Mohit. So he's not part of the band anymore, but he had this one padhant. It's this one bowl with which the song starts. Our guitar player Abhishek, he had kind of done like basic sequencing, and it just like you just know that there is a song here. It's almost like you hear a musical idea and you're like, that wants to be something. So once you have that, उसके बाद सब कुछ आसान है. But just to identify the unforced, like it's almost like if it exists on its own. So when Abhishek did this, and I think we played it a couple of, not, we didn't play it, but it's one of those songs which took like, I think like 30-40% shape in a recording process itself. Like we kind of knew that, okay, this has to be the groove, the main rhythmic idea. There was an idea for the bass line along with the button. And then it's just Ujjwal's genius to find that Swaminath, like that, I can't call it a bandish, but I don't know what it's called, I guess, in Carnatic. But like that composition, to find that composition and just to fit it. Once you find the top, like the outer layers of the sandwich, you can stuff it with whatever you want, as long as you have two pieces of bread. So once you have this rhythmic foundation and that melodic idea, then everything just falls into place. So, but I guess the overarching theme of what takes the shape of a song eventually, whether it's for the band or like any musician for that matter, would be, there is this moment, man, like, and it's when you're in a state of, you can call it a state of flow or whatever, but like when you're in this moment where it almost appears as if the music just lasts a little while longer than how long you're playing it for. Let me elaborate a bit. Like there is this thought in my head that I want to play a particular note, right? And milliseconds later, if I'm lucky, I manage to execute that note on my instrument. Hopefully with the articulation that I thought of and my ability allows me. And this note comes out in the universe. Somebody hears it, like whoever I'm playing with, like my drummer or whoever. At the same time, I've also heard it. But the thing is, now there is this very fine balance of like coming prepared with, I already know what I'm going to play next because of patterns or whatever that I've practiced or jobi. Or I genuinely react to that note. And then I react musically, right? So, you know what I'm saying? Like that the music exists for just a little while longer than it's supposed to. Like
Yeah.
it's not like you're slowing it down or speeding it up, but it's almost like it suspends a little bit. And when it suspends, you can identify the magic. You can almost see that moment of rest or inertia before the momentum comes again. And if you see that spark, which if you're in a playing unit like a band, and if you rehearse regularly, those, let's just call them miracles, man, they start occurring with a greater frequency. It happens. And it's your job to make sure that this shit is being recorded so that you can play back and verify this, that there was something there. And then one second. And then your instinct as whatever you want to call it, arranger, producer, guitar player, whatever, like, man, I will react like this. Something else will happen. On that same album, there's a tune called Mandirva, which is again based off a Bandish. But the Bandish came much later. I remember we were setting up for rehearsal and my drummer was just playing this reggae thing, and he was playing a groove. It was very reggae. and I played a bass line, and Abhishek hit one chord. And in this amount of time, like everybody else had set up also and all that. And immediately Ujjwal started singing that first line of Ja Ja Re Apne Mandir Ba, And that was it. Like it just takes like a little bit of recognition of what you just did is inspiring me or putting me in a place where I should react like this. When all those reactions gel, the song is born by itself, and then you just keep sitting there and scratching your head and thinking, how did I make this? How did we make this? Yeah, it's the greatest feeling, man. It's the greatest feeling. That shit just falls into place. It's like a satisfying game of Tetris.
Oh, that's such a brilliant.
Yeah, it's something, and it happens with the more you practice as a unit together, the more it'll happen because you tune in. You almost know what this fellow musician in your band is going to do. That's what makes Led Zeppelin great. Like, it just feels like none of that shit was planned. It was destined to happen. And when it happens, it's just that all four of them it's like a wrecking ball hitting you, man. The only other band that gives me that feeling, not the only other, a lot of them do, but like close to that feeling is Tool. Yeah.
Tool, the TOOL, I'm guessing.
Yeah, that band, it just same feeling. It's like Led Zeppelin on steroids,
I'm checking it out.
Yeah. But sorry, like I get very romantic with this idea of like, that magical moment of you should not be overthinking that, But that magical moment, man, it happens, and when it happens, it's joy. Yeah.
No, I mean that energy is so contagious and loud. I think I see it in creative people in general. That's one perhaps thread that ties all creatives together. Yeah, I mean, I was wondering, like, and you answered this, just how do potential competing creative visions, or at least since there are other people involved, right? And each person might, like, they might have some form of creativity that aligns, but there are also some creative dissonances. And so I think it's perhaps a case of trying to find what works for both of us, and then that's when it strikes, and you have this sort of eureka moment, and you just power through.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you about teaching audio. Now, like, okay, for the listeners, you taught a course at Ashoka University called Fundamentals of Podcasting. And you also had another one, The Art and Craft of Sound, which I actually feel bad that I couldn't take. I'm curious to know what goes through your mind when trying to prepare a curriculum, even when you teach at SACAC, Sri Aurobindo Center for Arts and Communication. I was like preparing, when I was preparing for this, I said that in my mind a couple of times. Yeah. So what goes in your mind when you're trying to design a curriculum to teach something audio related? What I'm trying to get at is, what do you want your students to leave with?
So, I mean, when I said about designing the course, I want to answer the fundamental question, a couple of fundamental questions. First thing is how would I like to be taught? That's a very egoistical position to be in, because I assume that everybody wants to learn the way I would have wanted to learn. But like when I said, how would I like to be taught, is that what is the thing which will hopefully bait me in a good way? Like it'll hook me into this. Why should I give a shit about audio? Because if you don't care about what you're learning, you are not going to get into it. Unfortunately, our education system is based on that idea that you must do this. It is for your good, right? The first 12 years of everybody's schooling life is like that only, man. You must do this. That's it. Okay, fine, I get it. I must do this. But is there a way that it becomes more about, like, it widens the net a little bit? Can it be more like connected to life in some way? That's so for me. Like, for example, I have this simple idea that if you've heard music and if you've eaten food, you can become an audio guy. There is, like, that's it. That's just the criteria. Because nobody thinks twice whilst eating something and saying, it has too much salt. There is no difference between that and knowing that this shit is too loud, I need to turn it down. Right now, there are strategies in figuring out the right amount of sodium that needs to go into your food. Right? In the same way, there are strategies to figure out, like, what could be made to appear as too loud or too soft or whatever. So with this idea in mind, that how do you connect it? That's my core at getting at designing any sort of teaching material. It needs to be embraced as if, like, okay, this shit doesn't seem alien to me. Because you want to sneak in the technical bits, If you start right from the technical bits that audio is energy, vibration, amplitude, frequency, you will lose your audience span. Doesn't work like that. Excuse me. And the second idea is that, is there a first principles way of getting at this?
Okay.
That how can you engage a potential student into understanding the basics at such a strong grounding that tomorrow when they are presented with a set of problems, they should be able to weave their way through it to the solution, And in my sessions and in classes, I keep referring to as like tattoos that you should get, There is this one idea of cleaning it up and turning it up. That's it. That's all you have to do. Like, get rid of shit that you don't need and bring the shit that you want to hear into focus. Now, there are various strategies involved with that. And it is endless and it is super deep. And I'm still exploring like certain depths and all that. But like, that's the idea. You should be able to connect it to something that you don't identify as a skill. You just identify it as like a personality trait, Like, I like Chinese food. I like this kind of music. It'll be nice to know how Chinese food is made. It'll be nice to know how this kind of music is made. And that's it. You're not in it. Now it really depends on trying to figure out what are the connections we can make in terms of the stuff that we really need to know. And in this day and age, you can get away without being too technical, right? Because a lot of the heavy lifting can be done by software. But that's it, man. Like the idea being that base all of this on the idea, like some first principle level of thinking that you should be able to grasp at it, but and figure the way out. Okay. That's and then there are obviously within the scope of a curriculum, there are certain things that you want to touch upon and you want to do them. But the overarching theme is just that if I was taught like this, and the thing is, like, I went to sound school for like a year. It was supposed to be 6 months, but it turned out to be a year. But yeah, none of it was taught like this. And
was it technical?
It was. Kuch bata diya and all that, but like it's almost like bookish, But in the next 5 to 6 years, while working, I figured out stuff, and which happens in every line. Like, you can learn your bookish stuff, but once you go out in the field and you are doing an actual job, you're on a gig, that's when the learning really comes into play. And you're like, man, that doesn't matter how many self-defense techniques you learn, right? If you're in a situation like you have to remind yourself to bring them into the forefront and use your techniques. So eventually, you want to get to a point where there is no separation between the technique and how you approach work. Like, you are doing it like that. Like in a fist fight, you will pull out your taekwondo skills or whatever. Like, think of a weird example like that. But that's it. It becomes a part of your life, And otherwise, I feel like education is just functional then. There's no point nahi hai. Yeah. Sure, it's nice to know what, calculus and derivatives are. But
it's not nice. I don't think it's particularly nice.
No, it's super fun, man. Yeah. Like, seriously, there is some joy over there. But wait, the idea that you have to figure out how it connects to life. Yeah, otherwise kaise hoga? Otherwise, it's just bookish knowledge. It's pointless. Yeah.
Okay, last 2 questions.
Sure, yeah.
If, say, someone is listening to this conversation and they're convinced, they're like, okay, you know what, I want to get into this world of audio, not even as like a job, but, just as an enthusiast. What do they do? Like, what is some actionable thing that they can take right after listening to this episode?
I would say that the simplest thing you can do is take out your phone, turn on the voice memo app, and just record stuff. And listen back to it through a set of speakers or headphones. Headphones sabke paas hain. That you're comfortable with, that you own, that you're comfortable with. And just try to see the visual aspect of the sound you just recorded. Because even through a simple phone, you will hear depth. You will hear differences in loudness. You will hear differences in how bright things are, how dull things are. Just basic shit. Once you hear it, if that grabs your fancy, right, then that should bring you to the next stage, which is, I am hearing it like this. This microphone on a phone is hearing it like that. How wide is that delta? And now what do I have to do so that the mic hears like me? And now enters a very basic software. You could get a simple sound editing software on your phone for free. You could, if you're adventurous, you could get your hands on something like Audacity, SoundForge. If you're really adventurous, you could get something like Reaper. And just teach yourself the basic idea that how do I null the delta between what I'm hearing and what the mic is hearing. The closer you get to reducing this limit, the next stage is that I'm hearing this, I want to hear that. So take the recording aspect into some sort of post-production, and then you will realize that things that appear farther are darker, and then somehow the geek in you will be awakened and you'll be like, high frequencies die faster. That means I could record things really close and darken them up and they will appear distant. And then it's just like you're off to the races, man. It's just like play, record something. Sound, I mean, just to be geeky about it for just a little bit, sound is just air moving. Just capture some air and hear back. That's it. That's how you start. And once you start, it's just about hearing the difference between how you hear and how a mic hears. And then asking the questions, okay, if you've reached till that point, then you'll be like, okay, doesn't matter. Now you can look up some YouTube videos or come and do a course with me. I will sort it out for you. Yeah.
Join Ashoka or join Sakak and you'd be good.
Yeah.
No. You know what I really loved about your answer? Like you end up in such a scenario, once someone goes through exactly what you said, they would need to learn, those technical aspects as and when the need arises. So when they're trying to null the delta, they'll realize, okay, maybe I want to change certain parts of the frequency. Let me just say that. So you learn what an EQ is, and then you learn what compression is, and so on. That's brilliant. I have one more mini question before the final traditional closing question. Okay. The mini question is, I have to ask you this, but as an audio engineer, what mic do you use?
Man, I have a closet full of mics, but
I figured.
But this one is a Sennheiser 441.
Is it a shotgun?
No, it's not. It's a dynamic mic, but it's the king of all dynamic microphones. And
wait, it's not a condenser.
No,
I can't make out from this thing, but it's not an XLR.
It is. It's got
just a geeky thing, but
no, it's a dynamic mic, and
Achha.
it's yeah. I love this mic. It looks super cool, but it sounds great.
Yeah, I can hear you like loud and clear.
Yeah, I used to have a shitload of microphones, but like last year in June, during the Delhi rain, I lost some microphones. But I have some 6-7 mics left with me, so I will rebuild again. But this is Sennheiser 441.
The reason for the listeners, the reason it's so good is because of that, and it'll be the audio will be good because I will edit it. The last question, and this is so I've on the show I have this final closing question, which I've actually stolen from Tim Ferriss, something I learned recently when I was reading his book.
Which book was that?
And you can the Tribe of Mentors. It's somewhere there. I don't know. Basically, he in that book he asks people from all walks of life about their life advice. Life advice is its whole thing, but the questions are very interesting. Tim Ferriss has some great questions. So this question is, if you had access to billboards all across the world for a day, what is the one message you'd put there? And you can take this however you'd like. It doesn't have to be audio related. It's balls of your court.
So I have a short line and a big line. The short line would be present. But I guess the big theme is that this present moment, it's not a dress rehearsal for a future version of our lives. It's not. This is it. This is it. So for me, that be present is really this. I don't have copywriting skills, but if that billboard was to be populated with the line, it would be just your life is not a dress rehearsal for another one.
That's so good.
So my aim, that's what I kind of tell myself constantly, that this is it, man. And Yeah, I mean, it's not meant to be this inspirational thing or whatever, but it's just like so simple. Yeah, it's not a dress rehearsal.
You know how like some people are known for certain quotes. Like I think this could be the quote you are known for, like in your legacy. But really,
I'll show you the. I don't know if the camera will catch it.
or the mug, yeah.
This is
I
my
can see
cotton
something
mug,
like
which says
Kato something.
it says "Karo hustle, kato fasal."
Wait, what is Kato Fasal? My Hindi isn't
So
that good.
karo means to do, right?
Yeah,
So hustle, right?
yeah. Kato, cut the.
Yeah,
All right,
hustle is the crop.
the crowd.
Karo hustle, kato fasal.
Very good. I think that's a lovely way to end this answer. But really, sir, thank you for coming on.